Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Today I want to talk about something that would resonate with every single person listening, and that is the cumbersome process of moving house. Whether you're buying a house, whether you're renting a house, surely technology can make a difference there. So when I was reading recently that the lettings industry in particular is being described as the land that digital transformation forgot, I wanted to learn more about how the lettings industry is the next major market for tech disruption. And also how a company called Goodlord is redressing the balance to make the rental experience better for agents, landlords and tenants alike. And to join me on that conversation today is William Reeve from Goodlord. We're going to be talking about all this, but enough from me. Buckle up and hold on tight, because no matter where you're listening in the world, I'm going to be beaming your ears all the way to Shoreditch here in the UK, where William is waiting to share his story. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
So I'm William Reeve. I'm Chief Exec of a business in Shoreditch called Goodlord, which is a lettings software platform. It helps mainly letting agents in the UK manage their back office and workflow and sort out all the tedium that associates with moving house and being and paperwork around being landlords, tenants, etc.
Awesome. And I'm looking forward to talking more about how you're using technology to solve some of those problems around the tedium of moving house, etc. We've all experienced it at some point. So Before we do that, I'd love to find out more about how you got here. So can I ask you share your origin story, where your passion for tech came from, how the worlds of tech and property would collide for you, or just a moment that put you on this path? Can you remember?
Yeah, I mean, origin story is an interesting word for it, I suppose, because it really started pretty young for me. I was a teenage computer geek. I became a computer geek even before I was a teenager, back in the world of sort of Apple IIes and things, ZX Spectrums, and found myself, being completely obsessed by computers as a school kid, and did some professional programming actually as a kid, software games developing. But I kind of realized at some point I wasn't necessarily going to be a coder for the rest of my life. And I think I was just in the right place, right time in my early 20s when the internet kind of emerged in the UK. And I've also always had a bit of a thing around business, I suppose, and to study economics at university. And I think the internet, the World Wide Web in particular, that sort of combination of technology and business opportunity has been perfect for me. So I've been involved with the internet in the UK ever since the 90s.
And so many people that I've spoken with were inspired by those magical days of the ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64, all those computers, copying
BBC
code
Micro.
out of magazines. Yeah, BBC Micro, Acorn Electron, copying codes out of magazines, adventure games. And it's funny because now this seems to be a complete opposite approach by parents who think playing video games is bad. But I mean, back then it inspired so many people, didn't it?
It did. And as you say, you could really do a lot yourself back then. You know, basic on your computer, you could actually sort of do programs kind of in your lunch break or whatever. And I think it's got a bit harder since then.
Yeah, and that path would, of course, lead you to Goodlord. So I've got to ask, can you tell me more about the story behind the company, the problems you set out to solve with technology, and also the name? I feel there's got to be a story there, right?
Yeah, so I wasn't the founder of Goodlord. I got involved because one of the investors asked me to come and help it grow about 5 years ago. But it was set up 7 or 8 years ago by 3 renters, 2 kind of brothers, actually, who were real technology kind of evangelists, and the flatmate of one of theirs who was a Foxtons agent. And they were all kind of marveling how rubbish the process was for sorting their rental situation out. And the Foxtons guy actually knew that actually Foxtons probably was the best in class at that point. It had invested a bit in its own website and platform, and still it's better than everybody else's, but still could be a lot better. And so those 3 set the business up. They came up with the name. I think there was something around Goodlord is a positive word, whereas landlords is often not thought of as a positive word. So there's something sort of, if you like, catchy about it. The company's actually registered as Goodlord Limited, so there's a little bit of quirkiness about it. Yeah. But they got investment and got quite a lot of investment quite quickly, and some very respected investors. And one of those guys had worked with me a few years earlier at Zoopla, where I was one of the first investors and board directors at Zoopla. So kind of he knew that I knew a bit about the space and could see some of what I liked doing was going on at Goodlord. So he said he introduced me, and it was just the right time for me. I was just between projects and kind of met the guys, really liked what they were doing, and ended up taking the CEO role literally 5 years ago last month, actually.
Fantastic. And before we start talking about the technology and the company, can you just expand on the scale of the problem we're talking about here and how the lettings industry is the land that the digital transformation almost forgot?
Yeah. So, I mean, renting is in the Bible, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be able to quote you the chapter and verse there, but in the UK, there are about 10 million rental homes and there's over £100 billion of rent paid every year. So it's one of the biggest pieces of the economy. But actually, a lot of the activity associated with that is when people move house. And that is concentrated in the private sector. The rental sector is obviously a mixture between private and social and local authority stock. And the private sector stuff is mostly where and to be fair, the university student sector is where most of the kind of moving activity happens. And that's still a very paper-based process. But every time somebody's moving house as a tenant or actually as a purchaser, they're reorganizing a very large chunk of their lives. The rent is probably their single biggest monthly expense, but they've also got to think about their other expenses, their utilities, obviously with energy being sort of very much topic du jour at the moment, but their broadband, their insurance, their other finances, they might well have quite a lot of costs associated with the move. They've got to finance that. So there's a lot of stress involved. There's a lot of finance and money and hassle involved. There's also quite a lot of compliance. It's quite a political sector. There's quite a lot of regulation and protection built in. And all of that means there's actually an awful lot of admin required. And where we start is the bit of the market really that's managed professionally with the letting agents who, letting professionals doing this on behalf of their landlords. And that sector is somewhere around a third of the market. So that's not the only bit of the market, but it's the bit that kind of is, if you like, easiest to provide services into because it's the most professional bit of the market.
And I'm curious, if the rental experience is impacting 30% of homes in the UK or thereabouts, why do you think it is that it doesn't get the attention it deserves from the agents, the media and prop tech innovators, etc.? Why do you think it's fallen under the radar almost?
Well, I think, it hasn't completely fallen under the radar, but I think one of the dynamics that's happened, and I saw this at Zoopla actually, is that for most people, when they think about property, if you say, I want to go and do something in the property sector, they think selling, or they think buying and selling, they think owning properties. And that's kind of where, if you like, that's the sort of, if you like, quote unquote, glamorous bit of the market. When you see a newspaper headline about the property market, when it's going up or it's going down or something, you just think sales. And I think a lot of people don't naturally remember that a third of the market are not owners, they're tenants. And that bit of the market, historically, agents were always less interested in. So the lettings were always, if you like, the sort of second-class citizen in the property sector. That changed a bit after the global financial crisis in 2008, because, of course, the sales side of the market is very much more volatile and sort of it swings up and down based on sentiment. But a lot of agents found if they were completely dependent on the sales side back in 2008, they went bust. Whereas the letting side is much more steady eddy and basically the same number of people renting this year as there were last year. And that's about the same number there were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And if you look at the sort of graphs of the letting sector and over time and you show them to your Martian great uncle or something who doesn't know anything about the world and ask them to work out from that graph when the major crises were, or when the economy made changes, or we're in recession or whatever, they won't be able to tell on the letting side. Whereas if you look at the sales side, it's really obvious, and you can see when there's a boom, you can see when there's a bust, and so it goes from feast to famine. And I think since 2008, 2009, the lettings side of the market, the virtues of that predictability and so on have meant it's got a little bit more of a fair hearing, but still, that's only 12, 13 years ago. And there just hasn't been the same level of innovation. And most of the software providers, for example, in the space, didn't start with lettings. They started with sales and then went, oh, hang on, we've got an afterthought now. Let's do something on lettings. And Goodlord's been a bit different from that. And it has always been 100% focused on lettings.
And with the scene set there, can you just walk me through how Goodlord is attempting to readdress this balance to make that rental experience better, not just for agents, but for landlords and tenants alike?
Yeah, so what we do, our primary customer is a lettings professional, usually a letting agent, and there's some big landlords would use us, and they are using our software to create an integrated digital journey for the tenants and the landlords who they're working with. So the tenant is the main user of our software and going to be asked to sort of sign up onto our platform, register their detail, and then we're going to walk them through step by step everything they need to do to manage their assured short-hold tenancy in England or their PRT in Scotland, etc. And in the process of doing that, we can do quite a few things for people. We can verify their ID, we can collect electronic signatures, we can collect money and process payments, we can process spending, and we can organize additional services. So, for example, we actually help quite a lot of people with their insurance. We help people set up their broadband or their pay TV. As I mentioned, we also help people find energy energy providers. Everybody's going to need sort of electricity, etc., when they move house, and we can help them do that. And it's all in one integrated journey. It's very mobile friendly, so it's a very convenient, simple process, and it's all electronic, and that means it's faster. It's got compliance kind of built in, if you like. A lot of the kind of little tips and tricks you need to do to be compliant, kind of we take care of, and we're managing the money professionally, and we've got full audit trails. Just most letting agents are not necessarily going in inspired to go into the sector because of all the paperwork and the compliance burden, and we just take that off their plates, enabling them to focus on what they want to do, which is deal with the people and get deals done.
And I love how you're using technology to solve some of those big headaches. I've seen so many big changes over the years when somebody's looking to buy or rent a new home, and the big headaches that they want to bat out of the park before even making a decision. One of the first ones, of course, is what are the internet speeds in this area? Because it's so important now, isn't it, with working from home, etc.
It is. If you kind of think for a lot of people, if they could only take one thing, they'd take broadband rather than electricity. It's no, and the agents we deal with, they typically, one of the things we'll do with a lot of them is ask them how their current process and workflow works and how many steps are in it. And the more thoughtful ones will say, probably 20, 30 steps. But actually, typically, when you actually break it down with them, most agents, if they're doing the whole job properly, there are 40 or 50 steps involved for every tenancy. And we can chop that in half or better. So it just saves them a lot of time and reduces their risk. You get fined now £5,000 for the first offence on a non-compliant tenancy, more on any second offence. So if you've just got a simple cock up in your paperwork, by the time that you've processed 20 tenancies, you're liable for tens of thousands of pounds of fines. And if you rely on us to help you, then your risks are just much reduced.
And we will have people listening outside of the industry. And as someone that lives and breathes this space, can you just expand on why you think the lettings industry is the next major market for tech disruption? Because it certainly seems that the scene is set for that.
Well, look, we're never going to compete with something like ChatGPT or so on for tech disruption. But what we like about it is it's very predictable. It's a big space. There's a lot you can do with it. As I say, most tenants are having to reorganize a lot of their lives every time they move house. So that gives us opportunities. And some of the things that we find ourselves now selling as services or making money from are things that weren't even kind of on the roadmap 3 or 4 years ago. But because of the role, we have a trusted relationship with the tenant at a key time in their lives when they're moving house and when there's a lot of stress involved. So we've got a sort of ringside seat, if you like, for helping tenants with a lot of their lives. And that is a great opportunity for us. And I think the technology opportunities that you get now from what you can do with mobile phones, what you can do with high quality online services, the fintech side of things has really helped us because we are processing a lot of money. We're handling several £1 billion worth of flow every year. And we can use open banking. We can use virtual bank accounts. We can use a lot of the kind of innovations that have come along in the last few years in the UK market to just help make the process slicker. And that gives us the opportunity to build a kind of SaaS type business, software as a service type business at its core, but doing a lot more than that because of how complicated a typical tenant's life is.
And as someone that's monitoring the industry, always got one eye on future trends, etc. I'm curious, are there any particular trends that excite you? And how do you see these trends helping the future of prop tech to continue to evolve? Is there anything that excites you at the moment?
I'm never very good at the kind of crystal ball gazing, and I'm not perhaps quite as excitable as some other entrepreneurs are. But I think the fintech side of things remains very interesting, and what's happened with open banking is still just touching the sides, really. There's an awful lot more that you can do with some of the innovation here around giving people access to the data, sort of creating APIs to let you do things which 5 or 10 years ago you would have had to do by kind of walking into branches and things like opening accounts and approving things. So from our point of view, being able to connect to an increasingly digitized universe, especially of finance, is really exciting for us. And I think we have still lots of opportunities to just build products. And this is not rocket science. This is not sort of quantum crypto kind of neural machine learning type stuff. This is kind of good, straightforward admin. But admin is quite complicated. It's constantly changing. There's a rent reform bill going on in England at the moment. The Welsh rental sector changed last year. The Scottish one changed the year before that. So you've constantly got to stay abreast of stuff, and any market like that, where there are 20,000 estate agents in the country or companies in the country, there are hundreds of thousands of people involved with the sector. There's over 1 million private landlords alone, and as I say, there's £100 billion of rent needs to be managed and supported. So we see it as a very exciting space, and it doesn't need billions of dollars of investment. It just needs somebody to be focusing on it and understanding what the potential of technology is to make it better and easier.
And what can we expect from Goodlord this year? Is there anything you can share about what's next, what your big focus is? I appreciate there's probably not too much you can share, but is there anything you can share that's taking up your time at the moment?
Well, so we've just announced a third acquisition, a company called Halo.rent, and we're very much in leadership mode. I think trying to make sure that we continue to keep an eye on any opportunities to kind of help consolidate the space, make life easier for our customers, bring more services under one roof. Obviously, I can't name names on that, but I think you should expect to see us be more proactive on that space. We're looking to do quite a few product releases and upgrades this year. One of the core parts of what we do is help people verify and check the references on people moving house. And there's some new developments coming in from the government on that around using technology to replacing some old school processes. So actually the government was somewhat sort of accelerated by this by COVID, because previously, for example, you would have had to check somebody's ID face to face, old school. And then under COVID, they gave people a bit of an exception from that and said you could do it through Zoom and stuff. But there's more. Now they're looking to make some of those sort of temporary COVID arrangements permanent, and we're looking to play a leading role in some of that stuff. Oh. And I think the payments side is, from our point of view, is very interesting. There's some of the new services available that we're in the fintech space we're looking to make use of too. So again, it's not going to be headline news on the mainstream media, but it's all taking stones out of shoes in the letting space.
Fantastic. Well, I wish you the best of luck on your journey. It'd be great to stay in touch and see where everything leads. But before I let you go, we began the podcast talking about your origin story. And I'm now going to ask you to reflect and look back on that story. Is there a song that maybe inspired you or important to you that you can leave everyone listening and add to our Spotify playlist, or a book that we can add to our Amazon wish list? I'll let you decide. All I'm going to ask is what you're going to leave us with and why.
So one of the books that was influential for me in my journey, I think, was I read it as a teenager. It was a James Clavell book called Taipan, and James Clavell's done quite a lot of historical fiction about Asia. Yeah. But Taipan was about one of the trading houses set up in the colonial era in Hong Kong, and it gave me a real passion for travel in Asia. And I went off to Hong Kong was one of the first places I went traveling as a backpacker, and I've traveled around quite a lot of Southeast Asia. Actually, I attribute my interest in that very much to the Taipan book. But it was also a book about business, and it was portraying quite a buccaneering approach to business. But I think that's one of the things that appeals to me about it is the fact that the hero was a businessman at his heart, and operating in quite a Wild West sort of, it was the Far East, but you know what I mean. It was in quite a kind of unstructured, lawless environment. But I think I always really loved that book. I've read it a couple of times, and always enjoyed the traveling I did inspired by it. So it doesn't have much relation to Goodlord, I'm afraid, but it was part of my origin story.
No, it's a fantastic choice. I'll get that added straight to our Amazon wish list. I seem to remember a film being made of it as well with Brian Brown. I could be wrong, but
possibly. I know his other books definitely have featured on the screen. So Shogun was a mini drama back in the 80s, I think, and Noble House has been televised too with Pierce Brosnan. But Taipan is, I think, the sort of start of his journey through that sort of Asia over the last couple of hundred years, and it's a brilliant book.
Excellent. Well, I'll get that added to the Amazon wish list. But for anyone listening to our conversation today, wanting to find out more about Goodlord, everything we talked about today, what's the best starting point to find Goodlord, contact your team, or even yourself?
Well, so our website is at goodlord.co.
Yeah.
Not .com, not .co.uk, but .co. My personal website is wreeve.com. And I think you should be able to learn a bit more about either me or Goodlord on either of those two websites.
Fantastic. Well, I'll get those links added to the show notes. So much I loved about chatting with you today, talking about the lettings industry, why it's the land that digital transformation possibly forgot, how you're addressing the balance to make the rental experience better for agents, landlords, tenants, etc., but also your origin story, how it all began in those early days of computing here in the UK. But more than anything, just a big thank you for sharing your story with me today.
Thanks very much, Neil.
Talking to William there about when you first move into a house, whether you're renting or buying, and the cumbersome process, but also the things that are top of mind for you now. And yes, In the age of expensive energy bills, choosing the right provider in your new home is so important. But even now, I think the biggest thing is, okay, I need to work from home a lot. What is the internet speed in that area? What is the best provider for me in that area? Is it cable? Is it fibre? And I'm curious, if you're in the search for a new home at the minute, what is top of your list? What is acceptable? What is not? And how are you using technology to rent or buy a property? And what did you think of today's conversation? So many big talking points, and I want to bring you into the conversation. You've heard from me, you've heard from William, but I want to hear your very human stories about everything we talked about today. So my door is open to each and every one of you. All I ask is you email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. If you want to send an audio message, just hold down that audio button on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, etc. And you can find me there at Neil C. Hughes across all platforms. And let's keep this conversation going. But that's it for me today. So a big thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.